Utter domination in all phases of the game. That was the name of the game for Indiana football yesterday in their 56-7 rout of Nebraska as Curt Cignetti's tour continues. Ben Haller, Nick Rodecap with you. This is IU Sports Sunday. And Ben, that was almost the perfect way to end homecoming weekend. Phenomenal weather. Packed house, one of the biggest crowds in Memorial Stadium history, and boy, they were treated to a good one yesterday.
I'll tell you what, Nick, I get up at 6:30 every Sunday morning and get fortunate enough to do this show, and I have never been as happy to do it as I was today. I wanted to get up and talk about Indiana football. When was the last time in the last 7 years where we wanted to get up and talk about Indiana football?
Besides this season, I can name maybe once or twice when Indiana football was actually worth waking up and talking about in a good way.
Yeah.
I mean, the last time they were worth talking about in the morning, Sunday morning, was when they fired Tom Allen. But it was usually never good stuff we were talking about. It's incredible.
Now, and the turnaround at 7 games for Cignetti and this team is it's not like there's one area where Cignetti came in and just totally flipped. It's everything. Every position group, every aspect of this team, on and off the field, the attitude of this team, the togetherness of this team. The once again, both the offense and the defense looked great. They were on the same page again, and so many different parts of both of those teams made it run.
Yeah, and this is probably what Curt Cignetti has done with Indiana football this season. Every single game, they've had skeptics talking about, they haven't played anyone good, or they haven't played anyone tough on the road, or Nebraska coming in has one of the best defenses in the nation. They just keep blowing people out. And Northwestern, you could say, maybe wasn't a blowout, but for them to come back after the bye week, both teams coming off a bye week, Indiana embarrassed Nebraska yesterday. I mean, 56-7 was the final score. Nebraska came in as one of the best rushing defenses in the country by all the numbers, but you wouldn't have known it by what they looked like yesterday. They hadn't allowed a rushing touchdown all season. They gave up 5 to Indiana. The culture here, that doesn't happen. And I can't stress that enough. I mean, we've both watched Indiana football for an extended period of time, and most people would offer their condolences if they knew that, because Indiana football has usually been on the other side of those kinds of beatdowns. But Curt Cignetti has made this sort of victory for Indiana not just like an anomaly. He's made it the expectation. He's not satisfied with anything less, and I think it's that attitude, that lack of complacency, that's really helped him flip this culture. And we're talking maybe 10, 11 months at this point.
Yeah, I mean, not only are they one of the best rushing defenses in the country, coming into the game, they were one of the best defenses in general in the country. I mean, they were averaging like 12 points allowed per game. Obviously, hadn't allowed a rushing touchdown up to that point of the season. And Indiana beat them 28-7 with their starting quarterback in the game, and then 28-0 with their backup quarterback in the game. I mean, that's just how it went yesterday. You could tell Nebraska looked defeated, and Indiana just took every chance they could to jump all over Nebraska. And there's a 2-drive sequence that happened in the second quarter that really, to me, was like, wow, this showed how much of a well-oiled machine this offense is. It's one where I think they had a drive. They went down. It was like 9 plays. I think 7 of those were rushes. A couple of big runs from Justice Ellison. Tyson Lawton got brought into the game because Ellison had a big run. And they were able to punch it down Nebraska's throat running the ball. And then they come out the next drive and have a 4-play drive, 2 really nice throws, 2 throws over 25 yards, one to Elijah Surratt, one to Omar Cooper. Both of those are spectacular plays. I mean, it's so hard to scout against this team because you don't know whether to key more on the game in the air or the game on the ground.
Yeah, and those drives you're talking about where Indiana was just so balanced in their win over Nebraska yesterday, it came within the last 7 minutes of the second quarter. Indiana was up 14-7, and then that was right after Nebraska scored their touchdown to cut it to a 1-score game. And we were, at least in the press box, you were on top of the press box, but inside we were sort of thinking that, okay, Maybe this is going to be like a back and forth, maybe like 28-21 type game where the teams exchange punches and a big defensive stop is the deciding factor. Then you talked about the first drive, which made it 21-7 for Indiana, was sort of predicated on a couple really big runs. It started with Justice Ellison straight up the middle, and man, he talked about it yesterday after the game, and he said some of the gaps that he and Tyson Lawton had to run through, it was like the Red Sea had parted. Yeah. Which is no exaggeration, and it's the offensive line has been fantastic. But Ellison and then Tyson Lawton for 14 later in that drive made it 21-7. Indiana forces a 3-and-out. Then they get the ball back with a minute left, go down and score, make it 28-7, I should say. And then I mean the Sean Asbury almost pick six. He said he thought he might have been gone, but he was not. But the Sean Asbury interception deep in the red zone for Nebraska. It was a 7.5-minute drive to start the third quarter. And Asbury takes it 79 yards the other way on 4th and 6, 4th and 7, intercepts Dylan Raiola. That leads to an Indiana touchdown. And Taven Jackson, on that drive and throughout the second half, I mean, he looked great.
Yeah.
Curtis Rourke left with a thumb injury, and Kurt Cignetti said that he's optimistic about it. Like, it's probably not anything serious. They're going to know more today when they look at it. But Taven Jackson stepped in and just didn't miss a beat yesterday.
Yeah, Jackson didn't have to do much, but he didn't really make any mistakes at all. And there were a couple of really nice throws. Maybe the best throw of the game there early in the fourth quarter. And, I mean, I really want to say that speaks to how surprised I think people might be of Taven Jackson's abilities after last year. I think it also speaks to just the offense around him and around Curtis Rourke. I mean, so many weapons, so many different guys who can go up and get the ball, and then again, just a run game who could really help out the passing game just because of how much it establishes and how much it has to keep defenses honest. I mean, Nebraska started to load the box a little bit. That's why they were able to get some of those really long passing plays later in that second quarter. And Taven's done a nice job.
And the way India and Curt Cignetti actually talked about that yesterday after the game, the way Nebraska was stacking the box on some of those RPOs made it really easy for Indiana to get big gains. Because I mean, Indiana was they read Nebraska's defense like a book, to sum it up simply. I mean, 215 rushing yards against a team that was allowing under 100 per game. Mm-hmm. I mean, that was one of the big storylines, was like, which unit is going to have the better day? Is it going to be Indiana's offense with all those weapons, or is it going to be Nebraska's defense with all the physicality up front? Man, it was not even close, to say the least. Indiana ran all over the Huskers, 215 yards on the ground, 5 touchdowns coming from 4 different running backs. And I saw a tweet that somebody put out yesterday that was like, this is why everybody hates Curt Cignetti, because he leaves the starters in for the whole game just to run up the score, and it's selfish, and it's stat padding, and it's not good sportsmanship. First of all, in a Big Ten conference game, sportsmanship is the last thing any team should be concerned about. Second, Indiana's backup quarterback, Taven Jackson, was in for the entire second half. Mm-hmm. Curtis Rourke was in street clothes in the third quarter. Second, Indiana went 4 deep at running back, scoring touchdowns alone. Indiana had, I mean, just looking, 10 different guys catch a pass. So I'd say they went pretty deep. I wouldn't say they left the starters in the entire time, because there were so many guys who caught a pass, and it was an offensive clinic.
You could tell just the way the team came out firing in the first half and to start the game. They just play with a certain chip on their shoulder that I just don't know where they get it from. Other than saying they get it from Curt Cignetti, which they do. I don't know what Cignetti says to him in the locker room about what Nebraska said about their mothers or whatever, but Tom Allen never got his guys to play this way. And once again, we talk so much about the offense. The defense, the defense adjusted. There were the first 2 or 3 drives Nebraska was driving. One of them, they had a red zone turnover. Then they go and score a touchdown. And the first drive, you kind of take a grain with salt, because what in the world was Ja'Cory Barney doing on that kick return?
You're referring to, of course, after Indiana scores the opening touchdown, Nebraska's return man, Ja'Cory Barney Jr., fields the kick in basically the back right corner of the field. by the end zone relative to where Nebraska's returning from. He fields it and he toe taps like he's a wide receiver trying to catch a pass in bounds, but he does it at the 1 yard line. Yeah. And if he had, what he was trying to do, I would think, is put 1 foot out of bounds and then get the kickoff out of bounds penalty, because if you have 1 foot out, it is a penalty when you catch it. But he had both feet in bounds, so Nebraska would have had to go the length of the field to score, and that was a very odd mistake. But Nebraska got out from the shadow of their own goalpost, to your point about they looked like they had something, and then Dylan Raiola just never got comfortable. And Nebraska couldn't establish the run, which is what we said they needed to do to beat Indiana. You have to establish the run. Dylan Raiola is not going to win this game in the air, and Indiana's defense just never let him get his feet set, never let him get comfortable at all.
Yeah, and it's hard to establish the run against Indiana. It's hard to do anything against Indiana's defense because of the linebacker group. You look at Jalen Walker and Aiden Fisher, and one of the biggest things is Aiden Fisher has so much freedom to do whatever he wants because of how good Jalen Walker is in coverage. And we saw that yesterday. Walker's fine dropping back. And a lot of times, sometimes those when you're running a certain type of zone and you need both linebackers over the middle, Jalen Walker can cover a lot of that. That gives Fisher the freedom to go blitz.
Fisher led the team with 11 tackles yesterday. I mean, it seems like he's led the team in tackles every single game. Indiana's utter domination of Nebraska, a game for the history books. We're talking about it on IU Sports Sunday. We'll talk more right after this. Nearly 500 total yards of offense again for Indiana football, and their dominant win over Nebraska yesterday, 56-7 to improve to 7-0. Indiana's place kicker, Nicholas Radicic, outscored Nebraska 8-7. That's actually not a misprint. It's facts. Welcome to IU Sports Sunday. He's Ben. I'm Nick. And Ben, the Indiana offense yesterday, so balanced. And that's kind of been the name of the game for them this season. I mean, the rushing attack over 200 yards per game like it's nothing. They eclipsed that mark again yesterday. Curtis Rourke left the game with an injury after the first half. Taven Jackson came in, didn't miss a beat. I mean, this Indiana offense is, we can safely say that they're legit. They can hang with the big boys, and they've certainly looked like one of the best in the country so far this season.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. Nebraska does two things well, or the two biggest things they do well. One offensively, one defensively, is just the battle up front. The offensive line, we already talked about how physical it is, how tough they are to get any sort of penetration if you're the defense. The defensive line's the biggest part of their defense as well. I mean, I was worried about it at first. I think in the first couple of plays, you could tell that they were really Indiana wasn't getting a ton of movement. I think there was a run by Ellison in the first drive where he was able to bounce out, but he completely made that himself, and the offensive line didn't help. The offensive line, though, adjusted, and after that first drive, you could tell they were just setting the tone, and that's where everything starts.
And what's interesting about the Indiana offensive line is that people will talk about how Indiana brought in all these transfers and how basically, I mean, the argument since before the season started has been this is just JMU West. But the offensive line is primarily, if not entirely, made up of Indiana holdovers who stayed when Tom Allen left. And that is one of the bigger surprises to me. And the offensive line, Justice Ellison was talking about it yesterday after the game. He said that they don't get all the press, they don't get all the TV time, but he goes over to the sideline after pretty much every drive and congratulates them and thanks them. And he said he's really excited to play behind them. And man, with some of the gaps that they're creating, some of the way they're winning their battles up front. I mean, these guys are all very old, very experienced. Most of them stayed at IU. I think all of them did, actually. I mean, Nick Kidwell came over from JMU, was supposed to start, but suffered an injury. But Mike Kadick, Drew Evans, Carter Smith, Bray Lynch, Trey Wedig. I think Trey Wedig is the only one who didn't begin his career at IU. He came over from Wisconsin.
He is, and I've been saying it, offensive line was arguably, maybe other than the wide receiver room, was the best part of that Indiana team a season ago. It just didn't really have a great quarterback behind it. But it's an offensive line that had a good season. A lot of them come back this year. A lot of the guys, look at Bray Lynch, he didn't get a ton of playing time on last year's offensive line. But I mean, waiting his turn. The biggest part of this, I think, is Bolstad. The one coach that Curt Cignetti kept from Tom Allen's staff was the offensive line coach. And look, there's good reason for it. I mean, Bolstad came in last year and took an offensive line that was brutal 2 years ago and made it solid. And now he's turning them from solid to great.
Yeah, and Cignetti talks about Bob Bolstad, the Indiana offensive line coach, as a blue-collar guy who coaches blue-collar guys. Yeah. And Cignetti seems he is extremely process-oriented, very deliberate with his time. He's talked about it at length, especially these last couple weeks, about how he doesn't, keep the players too long. Like, once they're done with their work, they can leave. Once the coaches are done with their work, they can leave. And whatever they do in practice with the offensive line, I'd say don't change a thing, because it's working quite well. I mean, Indiana did give up a couple sacks yesterday, but Nebraska's defense is good enough. We figured that was going to happen. But
yeah,
by and large, I mean, Indiana, both in pass protection and especially on those explosive plays, Cignetti talks about the downfield blocking. The wide receivers were great in that respect yesterday. I mean, you could see it, especially on a couple of those big runs that came on the same drive, one from Tyson Lawton, one from Justice Ellison, that the receivers, Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper, two of Indiana's best pass catchers, are also two of their best downfield blockers. And it's so hard to beat a team like that when they're just so fundamentally sound. And that was certainly the case for Nebraska yesterday, because their defense had no answers.
A lot of the downhill blocking, when you look especially at wide receivers and other skill players, is almost just like a 1-2. It just seemed like, once again, on a Tom Allen team, these guys weren't as motivated to get out and block for their guys. But when you're winning and your offense is doing well and you have Curt Cignetti motivating you, things change totally. And to have a good run game, you need two things. You need a good offensive line. You need a good running back. The thing is, both of those have been so good this year that even if the other is struggling a little bit, it could still be a decent run game. The offensive line didn't come out in this game, even despite the 56-7 win and the 5 rushing touchdowns. Didn't come out in this game and look great at the start. They gave up a couple sacks. They weren't getting a whole lot of movement on the rushes, but Justice Ellison did such a great job of being able to bounce out and make some cutbacks, even when he didn't have a ton of room to make positive yardage, that once the offensive line started to figure it out, it was picture perfect for the run game. And there are even times where Ellison or Lawton makes a bad cut, but because there's such a big hole, they're still able to get some space.
And that's one of the things that Justice Ellison, the Indiana running back who came over from Wake Forest yesterday, he led the way with a pair of rushing touchdowns and nearly or over 100 yards on the ground. I'd have to check myself real quick. He was at 108 yards, averaging 11.7 per attempt. And a big part of that success comes from what he's talked about as one of his best aspects from the beginning of the season. It's his elusiveness, it's his shiftiness, and his ability to just cut back on a dime and get to the next level. He doesn't get to that next level if it's not for the offensive line. So huge props to the O-line, because they've been nearly perfect this season in all aspects. But the same could not be said for Nebraska's Dylan Raiola, one of the more highly touted young quarterbacks in the country. A lot of comparisons to Patrick Mahomes, some of them, caused by his appearance, the way he warms up for games, the mannerisms.
That limping off the field yesterday, I don't know if you saw the video.
I did.
It looked exactly like Mahomes did.
Yeah, and that was actually something that Daniel Flick, one of the great student media members here at IU, turned to me and he said, wow, he's even got the hobble down. It looks a little Mahomey. And, if they were to add 3 style points for that, maybe Nebraska would have only lost 56-6. 56-10. Excuse me.
Math is hard.
Yeah, it is. Math is hard, especially on a Sunday morning. But Dylan Raiola, it looked like some of those throws he was making, where Patrick Mahomes does it so well. He drops down to a lower arm slot just to kind of get around the defense, or maybe just change the look from the defense's perspective. Every time Raiola did it, the ball either fell short or was intercepted. And it looked like he just never got his feet set. It looked like everything he was doing was rushed. He was forced into making some bad passing decisions. I think it's a testament to how good this Indiana secondary is. Because Raiola coming in, people were saying, oh, he's going to, lead Nebraska to the promised land against Indiana. He's going to get them back on the right foot. That never happened.
Well, yeah, first and foremost, he didn't have time to throw the ball a lot. Once again, up front, Indiana was getting a lot of good pressure with the Nebraska very talented offensive line. And one of the things that does is if you're running every single play, not only does it make that specific throw on that play more difficult, but it makes you not want to stay in the pocket for the next play either. And when it's happening continually over and over and over again, that makes it so tough. The secondary and the front seven were just on the same page yesterday. There were some plays where Indiana would only send 4, and I was a little interested by it. They'd only said 4, but Indiana did well enough in coverage. Raiola had a ton of time, and Indiana still was able to stay on their guys. And Raiola didn't look great. He's a true freshman, though. You always have to give him the benefit of the doubt in that respect. But there were some throws that even when he did have a lot of time, maybe he had an easy man, he did not find a lot of guys yesterday.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, like, even when he had the chance to, go through his progressions, try to make a good decision with the ball, something that, he had only thrown 3 picks all season in Nebraska's previous 6 games. And then he comes in and he throws 3 in one game. I mean, it's definitely, I think, a wake-up call for Nebraska, and Curt Cignetti described it that way. After the game, he said, this is a team that, coming in, was getting a lot of national attention, and he said, I think this will open their eyes. And that's the first time I think we've really heard him, kind of lean into the fact that everybody is sort of, overlooking Indiana. And everybody was kind of picking Nebraska or not everybody, because some people understand how good this Indiana team actually is. But a lot of people were saying that, Nebraska's going to come in and their fans are going to, their fans are the reason the game's sold out. So they're going to be the difference. And Nebraska's going to take it, and Nebraska's going to win. And the Indiana crowd was a huge part of the reason Dylan Raiola struggled. And one of the biggest crowds in Memorial Stadium history, the biggest since 1973. You were outside. You were on top of the press box. How big of a difference did that crowd make, especially when Indiana was on defense?
We saw a couple of plays where Nebraska had to call a timeout. And a lot of times you can't get the play signals through. Audibles aren't heard by everyone. There were a couple of penalties that you could tell were caused by the crowd for Nebraska. It's not anything that's totally game-changing, but it's those little plays that in a close game could matter a ton. Obviously, they didn't matter a lot yesterday. I mean, I think Indiana would have won that game by a lot with 4 people in the stands. But still, I mean, no, it's just the atmosphere was great. At Curt Cignetti, I loved his quote after the game. He said on Big Ten or on Fox, he said, with the interview with Jenny Taft, he said, this is what winning does. It gets people in their seats, and they become the 12th man. And it's just a continuous thing for Indiana. Never to take yesterday for granted. It was awesome for Indiana. But I'm already getting excited for next week against Washington.
When Washington comes to town, another noon kick. And there are rumors, just rumors, that College Game Day might show up. But we'll talk about more College Game Day futures and the chance that that's actually going to happen, because it gets more and more real every week here on IU Sports Sunday. Indiana football 7-0 after a thrashing of the Nebraska Cornhuskers in front of a historic Memorial Stadium crowd. The Hoosiers now tied alone with Oregon at the top of the Big Ten, and it just gets smaller and smaller at the top every single week. He's Ben Haller. I'm Nick Rodecap. We thank you for joining us on IU Sports Sunday. And Ben, it just seems to get more and more real. The possibility that, dare I say it, Indiana's in the running to be in the Big Ten championship in December. It certainly seems like there are fewer and fewer obstacles standing in their way.
It kind of comes down to a 4-man race right now. Actually, you could throw in kind of a 5-man race right now. Actually, I can't count. No, it is 4. Indiana, Penn State, Oregon, Ohio State. And then you could throw in Illinois, too, if you really wanted a 5th team, because Illinois looked solid. But I look at the Penn State schedule, and it's very similar to Indiana. We knew back when they announced that divisions are going away, hey, the 2 best teams with the best records in the Big Ten are going to play in the championship, no matter where they're from. We knew a lot of it was going to come down to tiebreakers, and I think we're going to see that this year. If Indiana could take care of business against Michigan and Washington and everybody else, but then lose to Ohio State, there's a good chance they're tied at the end of the year with Penn State and and Ohio State. Or not Ohio State.
Ohio State would have...
Actually, yes, Ohio State.
Yeah, it would just be the one loss to Oregon.
Yeah. And in that scenario, Ohio State would win the tiebreaker, assuming that they beat both Indiana and Penn State because they do play them both. But the tiebreakers are going to get interesting now. Especially, I don't know what happens if Oregon drops a random game here and there, and there's a 4-way tie at the top with one loss. And I don't know Illinois' schedule for the rest of the way, but they're at one loss right now, so you could see that.
They would need some help,
Yeah.
I think. I still think that Illinois is one of the most fraudulent teams in the conference. Again,
I think that was apparent last week.
They needed overtime to beat Purdue.
Yeah.
And whereas Oregon came to West Lafayette on short rest and whooped Purdue for 4 quarters.
It shows how bad not bad, but it shows how Michigan is not the Michigan that we're used to seeing.
No.
Which is so crazy because, one, they have one of the best running backs in the country. Two, they have a top 5, very generously, it could be top 3, defensive line in the country too. But just outside of that, they're rough. Their quarterback is Jack Tuttle, if that sounds familiar for Indiana fans. And their secondary has looked bad this year.
Yeah, and that, honestly, as somebody who's a very staunch Michigan, I'm not going to say hater, but was very disappointed in the lack of punishment delivered to them by the NCAA after the Connor Stallions sign-stealing thing, I couldn't be happier with Michigan being terrible because it shows that, like Sharon Moore, the guy who took over for Jim Harbaugh, I saw somebody said he was born on third base and has sprinted all the way back to first. Because, really, think about it. Michigan, one of the biggest brands in college football, coming off a national championship. I know Michigan lost pretty much everyone and their mother from that national championship team. But this is a bad season for them. And it's from a problem that we kind of knew about with the departure of J.J. McCarthy to the NFL draft. They don't have a quarterback. It's either 25-year-old Jack Tuttle in his 7th year of college. He's been a career backup for a reason. Mm-hmm. Alex Orji, who can really only run the ball. And Davis Warren, who is kind of just bad at everything. No disrespect to him. I'm sure he's a great guy, but he's just bad at everything on a football field.
The sprinting back to first after being bored on third base reminds me of a tweet I saw. Unrelated, but it kind of reminds me of what's going on with Alabama right now. It's like, I don't know what's more impressive. Kurt Cignetti turning around the Indiana program in 7 games, or Kalen DeBoer turning around the Alabama program in 7 days or 7 games. But yeah, Michigan's it gets interesting. There's an argument to be made after watching the Big Ten play yesterday, because of where the game is played and the multitude of this game and maybe the atmosphere. Other than Ohio State, the toughest test for Indiana might be Michigan State coming up. They actually have a quarterback.
They do. Aiden Childs.
That's just – it feels like that comes at such a premium right now in the Big Ten. The Big Ten quarterback play is bad.
And it's funny because Washington – who is it? Will Howard. He's okay, but he's not Michael Penix.
No.
And that's very clear. Dylan Gabriel, though, is fantastic. But really, outside of him, Curtis Rourke – I still don't trust Drew Aller in big games. I know he completed 200 yards worth of passes to a tight end. I still don't trust him in big games because I don't trust James Franklin in big games. And Will Howard, Ohio State, okay, but sliding down at the end of the game to lose the biggest game of the season, I don't know.
Yeah, with Ohio State, you look back on so many of the years and just look at it. Well, not last year. But before last year, you look back and be like, oh, their quarterbacks are the reasons they win so many games. Right now, that's just not the case. And it's not really like a shot at Will Howard, but it just hasn't had to do much. The defense is so talented, and he has so many weapons that there are a lot of quarterbacks, I think, that could be in Will Howard's situation and still be fine. But, yeah, Will Rogers is solid for Washington. I think, like, Washington's almost the reverse Nebraska coming up for Indiana, where it's just like, all right, now it's not as much for the up front where they have a lot of their talent. They have some talent and some weapons, and especially some guys in the secondary on the defensive side of the ball. So it's now a test for the Indiana's weapons and Indiana's secondary to see how well they react.
And Indiana's secondary looked really good.
Really good.
Really good against Nebraska. Again, Dylan Raiola completed about 60% of his passes, no touchdowns, 3 picks. But, Ben, looking at Indiana's schedule coming up, obviously they're 7-0. In 4-0 in Big Ten play, that's tied at the top with Oregon, one of 3 undefeated teams left in the Big Ten with Penn State and Oregon and Indiana. Indiana does not play either of those teams in the regular season. Coming up, they'll play Washington this week, then Michigan comes to town after Indiana goes to Michigan State in East Lansing, which will be a very tough atmosphere. And then they go to Columbus, they play Ohio State, which, if current form holds, will, I would say, be one of the biggest games in Indiana football history. And then they come back home to presumably kick Purdue's teeth in. If current form holds, Purdue is, I would say, the worst team in the conference. I don't think anybody would argue with that. But, I mean, really, you're looking at a legitimate possibility that Indiana could go 11-1 at the very least. And I don't feel like that's actually that out of left field to say.
That Ohio State game is getting really exciting. And I'll tell you, look at Ohio State's schedule. They go to Oregon. Indiana is the toughest opponent that Ohio State will play at home this year. Now, it's not going to be the biggest game they play per se because they play Michigan at home. But because they play Michigan at home, and obviously that's a big game no matter how bad Michigan is. But honestly, I don't think that's a good thing for Indiana. I think Ohio State, like that being the game for Ohio State, just they're the team that the bigger those games get at home, especially against a team they should beat like Indiana. But still, just the fact that Indiana's in that type of game and will be in that type of environment is just so good for the program, and could be a tune-up for whatever bowl game or maybe more they could see after the season.
You look at Ohio State's schedule. They'll face Indiana on November 23rd, 2 days before my 21st birthday, which will be fun. But next week, Big Noon kickoff is in Columbus, Ohio State, Nebraska. The week after that, November 2nd, they go to Penn State for what could be a top 10 matchup, assuming, both teams keep winning. I think that, honestly, that Penn State game might be the biggest game of the season for Ohio State, because you're right. You look at their next four after that: Purdue, Northwestern, Indiana, Michigan. All teams that they are better than. I don't think anyone's going to argue with that. But if Ohio State loses that game in Happy Valley, which presumably will be primetime, a whiteout, 100,000 strong, screaming at Will Howard, much more than the 60,000 he was faced with in Eugene. They lose that game, they're down to 2 losses. Then Ohio State almost has to beat Indiana to be in college football playoff consideration. Yeah. And I'm trying to think which coach I trust less in a big game, Ryan Day or James Franklin for Penn State.
James Franklin. Oh, do not give Ryan Day that disrespect.
Well, but I don't know.
James Franklin's never won a big game in his life.
That's true, but Ryan Day hasn't beaten Michigan, which for Ohio State right now is their Super Bowl in ever? Has he ever beaten Michigan?
No, he is not.
He is not. That's what I thought.
But he's also made a national championship.
Only because the Big Ten changed the rules to keep Indiana out of the conference championship.
But he still had to win those games.
Yeah, but it doesn't help that is something that, Indiana has always been a program of what ifs. Like, what if they had their hands team on the field against Tennessee in the Gator Bowl? What if they beat Ohio State in Columbus, or the Big Ten didn't change the rules, or, what if Griffin Oaks' field goal was good in the Pinstripe Bowl? And now we're talking about what if Indiana beats Ohio State to solidify a spot in the Big Ten championship in the college football playoff? That just still seems so surreal to me.
Well, I think Kurt Cinetti doesn't want those what ifs. That sounds like a Tom Allen program.
That's true. That's true.
What ifs.
I've taken the rat poison, he might say.
It's just weird. It's weird to hear.
It is. It's very odd.
It's been 7 games now, and it's still just a little tough to get used to. Not tough like in a bad way, but just weird to get used to. And I hear, I want to knock on wood, but I hear that this Saturday against Washington's again supposed to be like a great day, great weather, and everything like that will be perfect for college game day if that were to happen.
Hypothetically speaking,
if that were to happen, but that's what were we doing at this point last year? It was around week 7 or week 8. We were probably.
Was that before or after
the home Wisconsin game, which was like the one Big Ten win of the year? Yeah, that just caught everyone by surprise.
Yeah, but if you were following the storylines going into that game, Wisconsin's entire starting lineup was injured.
Yeah,
and you kind of knew it was going to be a down year for them. I was trying to think if this, at this point last year, it was before or after the 48-45 loss to Illinois in overtime. Because that was a game, like, that was a classic, Indiana football, close but never close enough in those sort of bigger, higher-profile games. And, I mean, they let Tommy DeVito. Was it Tommy DeVito? No, it was not. It was Luke Altmaier, I think.
That was one of the last 3 games of the season, actually, because
Okay,
I
it was
remember,
later.
and then Wisconsin was 9th, so I think that game was 10th, because I remember they won the Wisconsin game to go 3-6, and it's like, all right, if they win these last 3 games, they'll be bowl eligible, and they're doing it against not tough teams. It was literally like 3 of the worst teams of the Big Ten, in Illinois, Michigan State, and then Purdue, and they proceeded to lose all 3 of those games.
Typical for Indiana. And now, I mean, Curt Cignetti has talked about it from day one. And it's got to I know he doesn't get caught up in a lot of like the adulation and a lot of like the holy cow, this guy's actually doing it, because he's done it so many times in his career. And that's one of the things he came in and he was talking about, they called me and it made it seem like, a lot of people said rebuilding Indiana football is an impossible task. Like nobody's ever been able to successfully do it. Indiana's never had a coach leave the school with a winning record. Never. And it's been over 100 years of this program existing. A lot of people thought this was impossible. I didn't. Because he said, I'd done this a couple times before. I rebuilt Elon. I took a team that was, 7-45, and we won 8 games in my first year. Then he goes to James Madison and guides them from FCS to FBS and turns them into one of the best group of 5 teams in the country year in and year out. And then he comes to Indiana, and it's like, oh, well, Indiana's historically terrible, 700 losses. Read the Wikipedia page. It's not good, to say the least. And he changes the culture almost overnight. And this is something that I was thinking about it yesterday. I don't know if this 1-year turnaround, this kind of turnaround, has ever been done in college football. I'm sure it's happened over the course of maybe 3 or 5 years. But we're talking about the course of about 10 months for him to come in and completely flip this program on its head. I can't overstate how big of an accomplishment that is, but I'm sure to him, he's not surprised and he's not satisfied. And I think that's 2 of the biggest keys to his success.
Well, obviously to his credit, I don't think it's been done before, but I'll tell you, it'll happen a little bit more. It's still going to be ultra rare, but it'll happen more just because it's easier now with the transfer portal and NIL to just get guys overnight and just totally transform your roster. That didn't really happen a whole lot more than 2 or 3 years ago. And that's exactly what he did. That's still the craziest part. So much of it is his coaching style, his philosophy, and his game plan. And Mike Shanahan and Brian Haynes have been outstanding as coordinators this year.
Definitely getting some head coaching looks in the coming months. That's probably no surprise at this point.
But the recruiting of transfers is also maybe the biggest part of why this team is where it is. He had nothing to say this is to give to come to Indiana to play football. I mean, it was a program that went 3-9 a season ago. 4-8 the season before that, 2-10 the season before that. I mean, they averaged 3 wins over the last 3 seasons. And he got players to come out of the portal to a school that he's never been to come and play at.
It's ridiculous. And because, you think, okay, this team just fired its head coach very publicly after an embarrassing, you choke away the game against your biggest rival in their house.
Yeah.
And he gets fired the next day. Cignetti comes in late November. He said they had, 10 offensive starters in the portal. I think every running back from last year's team transferred out.
Yeah.
Most of the receivers were gone. Taven Jackson was the only quarterback that came back. I mean, this was a bare bones team. I wouldn't even call it a team because of how few guys stayed. And he comes in, he's in the office every morning at 4 a.m. Curt Cignetti is, and he's working and he's working and he's building this culture from the inside, and you see it finally playing out on the field. And this is a process that has taken months. He came in from day one. It was his job to flip the roster. He and his assistants did a fantastic job. And for them, it's just business as usual. Okay, we've done this at some smaller schools. Let's do it in the big time and, do it in front of a national audience. And, I mean, there's talk Indiana might be a top 10 team now. with a bunch of guys from different schools, a lot from JMU, 13 of them, but a lot of the key guys, key contributors from different schools. You almost think of it like the island of misfit toys. A lot of players who, like Curt Cignetti, sort of underdogs, have something to prove, maybe overlooked coming out of high school, coming over to a new place and building something special. And that's what we're talking about with Indiana football now. If you would have told me that 12 months ago, I would have said that you were crazy because this program was nowhere. And now they're selling out Memorial Stadium and setting attendance records, which is insane.
Yeah, and it's just so funny. I go back to the offseason, specifically at Big Ten Media Day and some of the other preseason press conferences that Cignetti had. He had so much confidence, and he was already cocky.
Yeah.
He hadn't won a game at Indiana yet. He had not won a game on the power conference level, and that was how much he was confident and cocky. And yes, it is possible to be both at the same time.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is he doing? I was like, I don't think he understands how hard this is going to be. But I guess it's not hard for him.
It's second nature. It really is.
I don't understand it. You're right. It just hasn't been done before. This is why it's so hard to break down why this was possible. Look, the portal class is obviously very good. Obviously, there's some great talent. But you look at it coming in, and you don't look at that portal class and say, oh, that team's going to have a chance at winning the Big Ten.
They were picked, along with Purdue, to finish at the bottom of 17th. The conference.
So I went back and looked last
night.
Yeah. 17th of the Big Ten, sandwiched right in between Michigan State at 16th and Purdue at 18th.
Yeah. One of those predictions regarding the Big Ten teams in Indiana was spot on. The other one could not have been more out of phase. Yeah. I mean, Indiana was not expected to do, I can't stress that enough. They were expected to do nothing. But sometimes that's when you play your best, is when the pressure's off and you trust the vision that the coaching staff has and you just let it work. And the players, I mean, they're all very focused. They're not, caught up in, the college football playoff noise and, we're ranked. Curt Cignetti himself doesn't care about labels, which I think is a very good thing because, Alabama labeled as one of the best programs in the nation year in and year out. Kalen DeBoer comes in, and it seems like the culture there, from what I've seen, from the way the players have acted, from some of the, the on-field things that they've done, it just kind of looks like he's lost them. Which for Nebraska, I keep saying Nebraska, for Alabama is really bad. Nebraska's got some questions to answer too. Yeah. We'll get into more of this, the IU football turnaround and its historic implications, coming up after this. You are listening to IU Sports Sunday. Welcome back to IU Sports Sunday from the WGCL studios in Bloomington, where we have just gotten word from Pete Thamel that Curtis Rourke, Indiana football quarterback and dark horse Heisman candidate, will not play this coming Saturday against Washington. Curtis Rourke sustained a thumb injury near the end of the first half against Nebraska yesterday and was out for the second half of that game. It was predominantly a precautionary measure, and Curt Cignetti said he was optimistic about Rourke, but it was an injury where I think part of the nail on his thumb of his throwing hand came off, and when that happens, you lose feel for the football, generally speaking, which as a quarterback is something you want to have. So, Ben Haller, I don't think Indiana football fans should be worried about Taven Jackson being the starter for this game against Washington coming up in 6 days' time. And I'll tell you why. Because Washington is coming off a bye week. Last week, though, they gave up 40 points to Iowa. Now, if you know anything about Big Ten football, Iowa is usually the team with one of the worst offenses in the conference. Their quarterback play, especially this season, has been questionable. Cade McNamara is old, and he's not very good. Iowa won that game primarily because of a great ground attack. They had over 200 rushing yards, and that was really the difference for them. Taven Jackson, in my opinion, is miles better than Cade McNamara, especially if Jackson plays like he did yesterday. Therefore, Curtis Rourke being out is obviously a big blow, but I don't think it's going to hurt Indiana that badly this coming week.
Yeah, Taven Jackson's better than Cade McNamara. I don't know about miles better. I still just think there's a lot that we haven't seen yet from Taven. And I think there's a difference between – I don't think you should hit the panic button if you're an Indiana fan at all. But I do think this makes this game interesting. It puts so much pressure on the defense now to be really solid, which Washington's offense isn't outstanding, so it's not the worst thing in the world. But to have a great ground game, one of the things you need to be able to do is keep the defense honest just with the ability to throw. But I guess Iowa didn't have that, so.
And they didn't need it.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, is that in that game in Iowa City against the Huskies, Iowa just ran all over them. And Indiana, as we have seen, cough, cough, yesterday against Nebraska, is more than capable of running all over vaunted rush defenses. And I use that term generously because Nebraska did not look like that yesterday, but they were heralded as one of the best rush defenses in the conference entering the game. Indiana's running game, I think, has carried them at times at times this season. It was what helped them get settled in Game 1 against FIU, and it was by and large what helped them run away from Nebraska yesterday. And Taven Jackson made some fantastic throws. He would have been perfect if it wasn't for an Anderson Kobe drop. It would have been 8 for 8, about 100 yards and a touchdown, maybe 2. He was 7 for 8 for about 85 yards and a touchdown, I believe. He made some really good throws. The throw in the back corner of the end zone to Elijah Surratt was fantastic. I said on Twitter it was one of the best balls I've ever seen him throw at the college level. I think Indiana will be fine. Jackson has had a lot of time to learn behind Curtis Rourke, and he looks phenomenal with this new coaching staff, as opposed to, he looked kind of shaky under Tom Allen, which, to be fair, in hindsight, probably wasn't so much him as the coaching staff, because he looked like a completely different quarterback yesterday. So I just don't think Indiana fans should hit the panic button about, the ship, sinking this week.
Yeah, and once again, I just have confidence in this coaching staff to be able to adjust, to be able to make a new scheme where you might not need your quarterback quite as much. And again, the biggest part of this is it's not like Taven Jackson is some terrible backup who, we have to run the ball 80% of snaps now. No, we could throw the ball a little bit too. Is he going to make some of those outstanding throws to Elijah Surratt and Omar Cooper that we saw yesterday? Not as much as Curtis Rourke would. But still, I just think you have a basic enough passing attack, even with Taven Jackson in there, that it keeps the defense honest. You will be able to run the ball against Washington.
Yeah, I do think that that's something to keep an eye on. But as of right now, Pete Thamel, first on it, reporting that Curtis Rourke, the Indiana star quarterback and Heisman dark horse, will not play against Washington this coming Saturday as Indiana looks to improve to 8-0. So still a big loss for Indiana.
Can we go back? This is to what we were talking about.
Yeah.
First break. All right, go back to, let's call it January of last year. You're going to the national championship. Can you believe that a year later we're talking about still being confident that we can beat Washington with our starting quarterback out of the game and Taven Jackson starting?
Well, there's two sides, because on one side you have the Indiana turnaround. On the other side you have Washington.
You really want to keep talking about Nebraska?
Well,
we can talk about Nebraska if you want more.
Their fans talked so much that I almost have to, because they were gloating like, "Oh, Curt Cignetti, you're welcome for us selling out your sorry stadium." By the way, Nebraska, your 400 consecutive sellout streak is the biggest lie in college football. It is fake, and it's a big fib. And I'm just going to die on that hill. I don't think they've actually sold out 400 straight games. But that's a discussion for another time. Nebraska fans talked so much that I feel the need to talk about them now, because they're like, we travel well, which is true. I think that's but to say that you're going to be the reason the game is sold out and you're going to take over Bloomington and you're going to crash Indiana's homecoming, and then your star quarterback that everybody's so high on comes out and looks terrible, I think is like poetic justice. Like Dylan Raiola, again, very talented young quarterback, but obviously very flawed. And I think it was a nice slice of humble pie for Nebraska, who has lost something like 25 straight games against ranked opponents. That streak continues, and Matt Rule got that unsportsmanlike conduct penalty, which I guess, when your team's getting 50-pieced, it's pretty embarrassing. But it's obvious Nebraska still has some stuff to figure out. And for their fans to come in and act all high and mighty, they haven't been nationally relevant in 25 years. Like, before you or I were alive. That's the last time Nebraska was actually good. So that's my piece on them. But I forget what I was talking
We
about.
were talking. You were getting to the point I was assuming before you misspoke and said Nebraska instead of Washington about how not only Indiana has a turnaround, Washington is not nearly the same Washington team as last year.
Oh, yeah. They brought back one starter from the national championship game.
Yeah,
and
they lost 21.
None of their coaching staff.
Yep.
Like Jed Fish, we listened to him talk at Big Ten Media Days, and basically it's an entirely new team.
Yeah.
They've got something like, I don't know, 60 new guys on scholarship. It's a ridiculous number. Washington and Michigan are both kind of in the same boat, which is why it's funny that Indiana plays both of them this year. They're the same as last year's national championship game teams in name only. That is it. Name and logo. Michigan, if you want to count Sharon Moore being the head coach.
Michigan actually has some.
I mean, they brought back Colson Loveland and I think Donovan Edwards,
too,
who I think
a couple
is
of their defensive linemen.
Is good, but not as good as everyone says he is. Something to keep an eye on. But Washington, we kind of knew that game against Michigan was it for them. Like, because there were rumblings about Kalen DeBoer leaving and the way that saga kind of unfolded, obviously Michael Penix, Roma Dunze, seniors, and a whole bunch of other guys. But Penix, of course, stands out the biggest because of his Indiana ties, and Kalen DeBoer as well. Kane Womack, Nick Sheridan, was he there? I think. But yeah, I'm not shocked at Washington being, in a down year, first-year head coach, and an entirely new roster. It's going to take some time for them to gel. They had that big win over Michigan, which gets smaller and smaller by the week as Michigan continues to slide. But no, I would never have believed that Indiana would even have a chance against Washington at this time 12 months ago, which, again, bears repeating, testament to what is going to go down as one of the biggest one-year turnarounds in college football history when all is said and done this season.
And that's exactly back to my point. Just the conversation started by talking about how Curtis Rourke's out. They're most likely not going to play on Saturday. Taven Jackson going to take his spot. It's just the confidence that Cignetti's built. Is that, Washington's obviously not the same Washington, but they're not a bad team.
No, they're not.
They're not a bottom 5 Big Ten team by
No.
any means. And they're still confident that with the backup quarterback that Indiana has a pretty solid chance to beat them. There's nobody on offense. And a lot of times when you say this, you're speaking about offensive line or secondary, depending on what side of the ball. There's not really an offensive lineman or a player in the secondary or anyone anywhere on this team who's getting picked on in the starting lineup.
No. And that's the thing, is that Indiana never really wavered yesterday after Taven Jackson came in, and that was something Curt Cignetti talked about. It's like the team has confidence in him. They're not worried. And Cignetti's kind of a guy who, he understands, like, injuries are just a part of football. I don't think that's a secret. But like Jalen Walker got hurt against Northwestern, and Indiana's star linebacker, the number 2 man next to Aiden Fisher at the second level of that defense, and Cignetti's just like next man up. We hope he's going to be okay. It was the same thing with Donovan McCulley when he got hurt against FIU. Like, Indiana's receiver room was so deep that it didn't matter, and now McCulley is in the transfer portal. So ultimately, not a big loss. Which, again, Donovan McCulley was the best receiver on this team last year, and it's that kind of depth. And obviously quarterback depth is harder to build, but Taven Jackson will be more than fine. I watched him dice up defenses in high school. He has all the talent in the world, and I think he finally has the coaching to really unlock that talent and play to his strengths. And again, I go back to that throw that he made to Elijah Surratt in the back corner of the end zone yesterday. A great catch as well. When you have receivers like that, who you trust to make those plays on those back shoulder throws where if they don't catch it, nobody does. I think that is huge for a quarterback like Taven Jackson. Very highly recruited, highly touted out of high school. Career took a different step. He came home to Bloomington. Obviously, the Trace Jackson-Davis connection, that they're brothers, that's big. But Taven has a chance, I think, this weekend to really show Indiana fans that he's way, way more than just the brother of one of the greatest basketball players in Indiana history.
Yeah, and this is backup quarterback's always just a weird dynamic. I mean, last year Taven Jackson was fighting for a starting quarterback spot, ultimately lost out to Brendan Sorsby, who, by the way, statistically is having a very solid year at Cincinnati.
He's talented as well. Yeah. I just think that he was kind of a victim of bad coaching, the same way Taven was.
And Taven ultimately lost out that spot. Still started a couple games after Sorsby struggled a little bit, or maybe the coaching staff failed. Sorsby might be more likely. But
yeah.
it seems from everything that I've seen that he's stayed positive and kept a really good attitude throughout all of this. And obviously, they said there was a, in quotes, quarterback position battle before the year, but obviously that spot was always going to be Rourke's. And Taven Jackson has seemed fine, and he finally gets a chance to get this opportunity. He's also got a lot of garbage time playing time. He probably has, for a team that's had a healthy quarterback through the first 7 weeks, he's probably had more playing time as a backup quarterback than any other quarterback in that situation, just by how many blowouts Indiana's been in, and that might help him.
Yeah, Curtis Rourke I remember the Charlotte game because I called that game. Rourke sort of got the Ashton Genty treatment where Indiana was up so much by the fourth quarter that he just got benched for, just because he didn't need to be in the game. Mm-hmm. Taven, though, in that game didn't look very good. He missed a couple throws, one of which was to Donovan McCulley, and that was the week before McCulley transferred, or entered the portal, I should say. They tried to get him involved. Taven couldn't make the throws, and those were open throws. Taven yesterday looked way better, and again, I think that getting that playing time, especially yesterday, against a better team, a better defense in Nebraska, at least on paper, but again, they didn't look very good yesterday. But Taven getting that time against a Big Ten team in front of that big crowd, I know that most of the crowd is on his side, but still, playing in those environments has to be something entirely different from what he was used to coming into this season. I mean, he got some very limited playing time at Tennessee, not enough to really get comfortable. But I think that him being able to show that yesterday, I know it was in garbage time, lower leverage situations, but then knowing that in a close game, you can lean on your running game, and they will move the ball at will. I think that is huge for him. I think he's set up in a very good spot.
Yeah, we talked about it was either last week or 2 weeks ago, just about the biggest surprises of this team, and we knew that the game in the air would be good. We knew Rourke would be good. He'd have his receivers. I didn't expect the front seven to be this good, and I didn't expect the running game to be this good either. I mean, Justice Ellison was an All-ACC third-team member a season ago, but I thought the offensive line was just I thought the running backs were just I thought it'd be good enough to help out the passing game. I didn't think it would arguably be better than the passing game through this point.
Yeah. Indiana football, a lot of depth. They'll be without Curtis Rourke against Washington this Saturday. He's set to miss at least a week, but the Hoosiers shouldn't be worried. More on IU football coming up after this on IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, the big news coming out this morning is that Curtis Rourke, Indiana quarterback, will not play at least against Washington this coming week. But, Ben Haller, I want to ask you, Indiana 7-0, still dominant over pretty much everyone they've played. And, I mean, we've gone from talking about, okay, maybe, Indiana fans hope they win 6 games, hope they make it to a bowl, hope they win that bowl. Now we're talking about the college football playoff, and we're talking about the Big Ten championship in Indianapolis, which Curt Cignetti said Indiana would play in all the way back in December when he visited Big Ten Network in Indy for a press conference. He said, we'll be back here next year. So I want to get your opinion on this. Indiana's ceiling. There are so many different ways this season can play out. Where do you think it's going to go?
Yeah, I think it's a simple ceiling. I think it's 11-1. I just think that Ohio State game is just a little too tough for me to put as a real possibility as for a win. And it's hard to see a world where 11-1 doesn't get you into the playoffs. Things get interesting because there's a chance that Oregon goes undefeated, wins the Big Ten. Ohio State just loses that one game to Oregon. Indiana and Penn State both could have one loss, both of those to Ohio State. But I don't think that the Big Ten getting 4 teams in the college football playoffs is that far-fetched at this point. It's hard because it's unprecedented because this is the first year they've had the 12-team playoff. But 5 automatic bids, then that leaves you with 7 at-large bids, and the ACC might get 1 with Clemson and Miami both making it, but the Big 12's not getting any this year. They don't have multiple top 12 teams.
I mean, they've got what? They have. I don't even know who they have. That's how.
I don't think they have a single team in the top 12.
Yeah, because Oklahoma State was supposed to be like one of the teams that was up there, and they've just
Kansas State
flat.
was supposed to be pretty good. Arizona was supposed to, but actually not Arizona. I mean Utah was supposed to be pretty good. But
Utah, oh man,
yeah,
brutal.
Cam Rising back for his 14th season in college football.
Is he collecting retirement checks yet?
I have no idea. But back to my point, there's 7 spots already for the Big Ten and SEC, already taking away the two that the champions have. So you could look at that and say the Big Ten could get 4 teams in, SEC get 5 teams in. I still have confidence that the Clemson and Miami both make it, so that's probably 6 at-large bids left and maybe 4 apiece or 5 and 3. But that 4 and 4 is a real possibility, especially now because some of those second-tier SEC teams are struggling.
Yeah.
Just look at Alabama now. I'm not confident in saying they're a college football playoff team.
Yeah, I would agree, especially after last night.
Yeah, Missouri, no.
Mizzou, no, not in a million
A&M
years.
and LSU are getting up there. But right now, I mean, Georgia and Texas, outside of them, Tennessee's probably in there right now. And LSU, that's why you look at 4 and 4.
I don't trust Tennessee, though, because Nico Iamaleava, awesome name, but he's a young quarterback.
He struggled in the first half, but he looked good in that second half yesterday.
Yeah, I'm going to give him...
He's going to be really good.
I'm going to give him the same treatment I gave Dylan Raiola until further notice.
Okay.
I don't trust
He's
freshman quarterbacks.
He's so much better than Dylan Raiola.
Yeah,
that is not a fair comparison
But
to Nico.
I don't trust freshman quarterbacks.
Yeah,
I know
that's
Nico
a fair
played
sentiment.
really well, and he outplayed Jalen Milroe, but I don't think he could do it in a neutral site or on the road.
I mean, that is a fair sentiment. I just think that I just don't like that sentence because Dylan Raiola is on a different stratosphere in the negative way than Nico.
Contrary to what some Husker fans would have you
Yes.
believe, that he's the greatest quarterback since Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
And every time I say Patrick Mahomes, I say it in the Chris Collinsworth accent. Patrick Mahomes. But no. Indiana's football ceiling, you think, is 11-1. Because I think a big part of that is because Indiana has to go to Columbus, and that will be by far their biggest, toughest environment to play. I mean, 100,000 strong. That's about twice what we saw at Memorial Stadium yesterday, which is difficult to grasp.
Well, so a little background on me. I'm from Ohio. I'm from the Cincinnati area. Grew up all my life just surrounded by Ohio State fans. A lot of my friends go to Ohio State. And I've been saying that I've been excited. The better Indiana plays, the more excited I get for that game. 'Cause, I mean, both of us will be in attendance.
Oh, yeah.
Not because I think that means they have a better chance to win, but just because that environment's going to be awesome. Once again, that's their second biggest marquee game at home this year, other than Michigan.
Which is absurd.
And so that also means that Indiana's going to be the toughest opponent that they face this year. That's going to be an insane environment. Indiana's not going to be ready for that. It's impossible to be ready for that. That's not a shot at Indiana.
Yeah, you can pipe in all the crowd noise you want in practice, and that's what Indiana was actually doing this week before the Nebraska game.
Yeah, I was at the baseball fall game.
Yeah.
And I was like, where in the world is this coming from?
Yeah, they were piping in crowd noise into the stadium during practice to get themselves ready for Nebraska. But
BYU, that's the one Big 12 team that's close to the top 12.
BYU has a real shot. Yeah, they are legit.
But they're going to win the Big 12 anyway, so it doesn't matter. They're not going to get at large.
Yeah, they get the auto bid. And that's the thing with the college football playoff. Like ESPN was talking about it yesterday. I mean, really, when you come down to it, the committee is looking for the best 7 teams that were not Power 4 conference champs or the top group of 5 team, which, by the way, is a whole nother discussion. Because you have Boise State.
That gets really interesting.
Yeah. You have Boise State, Army, and Navy.
We don't have enough time on the show to go into depth about all these things I want to say about college football.
Yeah, it's incredible, really, what we're seeing in college football this year. And I think it's cool because slight tangent. You had, at the start of the year, everybody concerned about conference realignment and the big TV contracts maybe killing the sport and turning it into this elitist, Big Ten and SEC versus everybody else. And maybe in the long run, that might be where we're headed. I say might because I still don't think that that's going to happen. Like the Big Ten SEC Super League thing, I don't think that's happening.
Really?
I don't know. Especially, I mean, you can make such a strong case against it right now because, like, Boise State's Ashton Jeanty is the Heisman frontrunner. And if he doesn't win it, I'm going to riot. Travis Hunter does not deserve the Heisman. Especially if he's going to go around.
But Travis Hunter really thinks he deserves it.
But if Travis Hunter, I think I deserve the Heisman if I'm a college football player. Like if I'm Curtis Rourke, I think I deserve the Heisman. The fact is, Ashton Jeanty is the best player in college football. He's doing things we haven't seen since Reggie Bush. But anyway, I think it's great for college football that we have all these intriguing storylines with teams that are usually not up there with the best.
See, this is why the 12-team playoff is so much better. We have more storylines than talking about, which group of 5 teams go into the Orange Bowl that has no affiliation to the college football playoff in the
Yeah.
specific year.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so much more fun. Could you really believe, though, if Boise State loses a game and one of the Army-Navy goes undefeated, that Army-Navy games have to get canceled
Why?
because it's the first week of the playoffs.
Wow.
But they're probably going to play in the American Championship.
Yeah, they'll
so it's
be
really
the
interesting.
AAC Championship.
And also, isn't it just so funny to hear that the American Championship is Army versus Navy?
That's what the founding fathers, I
Yes.
think, would have wanted.
Exactly.
Is for Army Navy to be for the American Conference title. Now we just need Air Force to figure out what the heck is
Yeah.
going on over there because they're the odd man out here.
Hey, at
Hey.
least they're the division. Coast Guard and Marine, they're still the Division One label.
Yeah. Could you imagine a Coast Guard football team?
Space Force too. Don't forget about them.
The Space Force. If they don't have the greatest passing offense of all time, we're really missing something here. But no, I completely forgot where I was going with this
Well,
for the second time today.
we did go off on a tangent. We were talking about. I think we're just talking about the playoffs in general, and,
Yeah.
and what college football is going to do with the 7 at-large bids.
Yeah, the 7 at-larges because you have the 4 Power 4 conference champions and then the top group of 5 team. That opens up 7 at-large spots. I think as of right now, and I know strength of schedule is going to be big here, and that is not in Indiana's favor. That's not a secret.
But you know what is? Just to interrupt you real quick. Eye test. That really matters in college football.
That's the reason Florida State got left
Yeah.
out last year. And in
Indiana,
hindsight,
if
that
there's
was
anyone that's passed the eye test, Indiana.
yeah. In hindsight, Florida State being left out was the right decision, and their fall off will be studied in an ESPN documentary here in about 10 years.
Yeah.
I hope Mike Norvell negotiated a good buyout because I think he's going to be gone. And no
Really?
Florida State fans, Kurt Signetti.
He went undefeated last year. There's not 1 year they're going to fire Mike Norvell. There's no way.
I don't know. I think I was going to say it just means more in the ACC, but it really doesn't. I think that's been made very clear.
I'd also like to update you. I forgot about Iowa State. That's
Oh,
in the Big
yeah,
12 too.
Iowa State.
So BYU they actually do have a chance at 2 bids, which makes this interesting. I mean, it does come down to how many bids does the Big Ten get, because I do worry that Penn State, just because of how they started the year, might have the edge over Indiana if they both go 1 loss, with their 1 loss being to Ohio State.
Yeah, the strength of schedule does not favor
No.
Indiana. But I still, again, I think that the fact that we're even having this discussion is ridiculous. But yeah, Indiana, SOS around 70th in the country right now, which entering this week anyway was actually on par with Texas. But Texas losing to Georgia at home is puzzling. But
Ewers doesn't look good.
Quinn Ewers?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know because I saw he got benched for Arch Manning and then Ewers went back in, but I don't know. From where he was, playing against Washington last year, he had Texas within a play of winning that game.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but I don't know. Indiana and the playoff, and again I go back to 2020. If I had wheels, I'd be a bicycle. But if the 12-team playoff existed in 2020, Indiana would have been in. They were the 11th seed in the final rankings. So it's not like that wasn't even that long ago. I mean, it was only 5 years, which is very strange considering how much has changed between now and then. But I think Indiana would certainly have to get consideration for one of the 6 or 7 at-large bids. I think they have to be in the conversation if they go 11-1. That's a big if. Again, Curtis Rourke, if he misses multiple games, then we're talking about a bigger consequence than just playing Washington. But I think you have to give Indiana a shot at the at-large.
Yeah, and they will. But I do think that 10-2 is too tough to overcome.
Yeah.
I think to have this discussion, which it's weird to hear that a 10-2 team in the Big Ten doesn't get into a 12-team playoff. But you have to remember, your vision of these records and conferences is skewed now because there are going to be more teams at the top because there are more teams in general.
True. That's true.
So a 10-2 team in the Big Ten right now just looks less impressive than it did in the past because there are more teams that are playing. Some going to be playing easier schedules.
Yeah, and that's just how it is. I mean, you've only got – the Big Ten's got 9 conference games, and you're only playing half the conference.
By the way, I'm looking at Penn State's schedule right now. They're looking at the same way we are, or Indiana is right now. With this upcoming week, they go to Camp Randall, take on Wisconsin. It'll be a tough game. If they win that game, they'll lose to Ohio State the next week, and then they have home Washington, road Purdue, road Minnesota, home Maryland.
I mean, the only team that I would bet, other than Ohio State, could beat them is Minnesota.
Yeah.
And
going on the road to Wisconsin is going to be tough.
Yeah, and Wisconsin's actually looked decent as of late. But, man, that would come down to either Penn State getting upset or, which, by the way, Penn State barely squeaked by USC.
Yeah.
But that
was huge for them. And negative for Indiana.
Yeah, and that was, again, going from Happy Valley, God forbid you drive an hour on the bus to fly out of the airport, James Franklin. But to do that, to go to Los Angeles and beat USC in their house, beating UCLA at right now is less impressive because UCLA is bad. But they beat Rutgers yesterday, so good for them. But no, I think that was a huge, huge win for Penn State. And USC, Lincoln Riley, I don't know. Are they? Somebody said yesterday that USC paid all this money to leave the Pac-12 and to join the Big Ten because they thought they were going to become like West Coast, Ohio State, or Michigan and compete among the big boys. And it turns out they're just Purdue on the beach, which, yikes. I think it's a stretch.
Nice.
It's a stretch. It's a stretch.
They're not Purdue.
No, they're not. Nobody's Purdue except Purdue. But no, it's really funny that USC wanted out of the Pac-12 and basically killed the Pac-12. And now they are a 500 team in a massively top-heavy conference. I thought that was really funny.
Yeah, they're another weird year. They obviously lost a very good quarterback.
Yes, Caleb Williams, I would say, is very good.
But yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting moving forward. It's just funny once again because you go back to the beginning or you go back to the offseason and say, all right, the Big Ten. There's so many like good teams that like. It's like any pick of these three are going to be the three that comes down to the wire. Who would have thought out of those teams that Indiana was going to be one of them?
No one, except Kurt Cignetti and the players.
Yeah, I guess so.
But yeah, the Oregon conversation is interesting as well because they in my eyes look like the Big Ten favorite. Like they look like they can go to Indianapolis and win the Big Ten title right now. But they've got Illinois this week at home. They go to Michigan. Michigan, very overrated, should be unranked here in a few hours. Maryland at home, Wisconsin on the road, Washington at home. If they don't go 12-0, I'll be shocked. I really will.
I mean, they will, and that's kind of out of the conversation right now for Indiana, just because even with one loss, they'll have a better resume than Indiana.
Yeah.
We're saying all this, assuming Indiana loses to Ohio State. That's because they probably will, and I don't even want to have the conversation, but.
Well, I mean, we were assuming the Nebraska game was going to be close, and we were really wrong.
It's true.
So winning
going into the shoe,
I've never been there. Full disclosure, I've never been.
I have been there for a concert. I've been there for a college graduation, and I have reffed flag football there. But I've never been there for a college football game.
You've reffed flag football at the shoe.
I have.
Were there 100,000 people screaming at you?
Yeah, it was crazy. I was getting bottles thrown at me. I had to overchange a call because I was getting bottles thrown at me like the Texas-Georgia game last time.
Which, by the way, that's incredible. But man, yeah, I had no idea you had reffed a game at the shoe.
Yeah,
that's wow. That's sick. But no, I think that game is certainly. I don't want to call it a foregone conclusion. If Indiana goes to Ohio State and beats Ohio State in their house, Bloomington might explode.
Yeah.
Except it's over Thanksgiving, so the students, I guess they'd be celebrating.
That would be very awkward timing.
Yeah.
Now imagine this. All right.
I'm imagining.
Indiana football goes and beats Ohio State on that Saturday.
November 23rd.
Indiana women's then on the it's the Sunday, Monday, Tuesday in the Bahamas goes 3-0.
Ooh.
Indiana men's on the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday goes 3-0. Indiana football team comes back just for good measure, beats Purdue by 70
at
home, and they go 8-0 in that span. Classes have to be canceled next week. Right?
Yes. The first weekend in December, which is historically
just cancel. Then at that point, cancel all the classes before finals.
Just cancel finals.
Yeah, exactly.
Because Indiana's at that point going to the college football playoff, and then the students have to go to, I don't know, Pasadena for the Rose Bowl, Knoxville for.
Well, the first round's not a bowl game.
Yeah, but if Indiana gets a first round bye.
Oh, that's what we're talking.
Oh, yeah,
because in this case they'd play in the Big Ten tournament. I forgot about that.
Thankfully, there's no Big Ten tournament for
Or
football
championship,
yet.
that's what I meant.
Don't give them any ideas in Rosemont though, because they might make it like everybody goes to like let's say Soldier Field and they play. Could you imagine? Oh no, that would be.
That's not feasible. I know they'd love to do that for the money, but that's not feasible.
You'd have
and I don't think
players
they're
forgetting
dumb
their
enough
own
for that.
names
Yeah.
by the end of the season, which is not good. But no, Indiana beats Ohio State. If Indiana beats Ohio State, you are playing with house money. And then Purdue would come in and think that they're going to win because Purdue thought they would beat Oregon. Like, I was up in West Lafayette yesterday after the IU game.
Really?
Yeah, and I was talking to some Purdue students, and they were like, yeah, I thought we were going to beat Oregon. And I'm looking at them, I'm like, what? Look, Purdue has a lot of stereotypes about kids that stay in their dorms on Saturday instead of watching college football, like going to Ross-Ade Stadium, which, to be fair, I wouldn't want to watch Purdue football right now. But the vibes up there are so different. And it makes total sense because they're a bottom feeder in the Big Ten. But the kids up there thought that, just because Purdue historically has beaten number 2 ranked teams at home, like Ohio State, I think, was 8 years ago today or something, that they were going to do it this year just because of that historical precedent without having watched a minute of what Oregon has done this season or what Purdue has failed to do. I thought it was really funny. Like they're like, oh, yeah, we're going to come to Bloomington and beat IU, and that's going to make it all worth it. I said, son, you guys might lose by 70. And I don't think that's an
You
exaggeration.
lost by half of that.
Yeah. I don't think that it's an exaggeration to say Indiana could put 70 on Purdue. I really don't. And Purdue fans might say I'm delusional, but just watching both teams, looking at the eye test, Purdue can't score from first and goal from the 5 because they call 3 straight option plays. Those kinds of, as Tom Allen would call them, crimes against the team, or CATs for short, are not going to fly against good teams. It's the same reason Oregon whooped them on short rest. But, man, the Big Ten, top heavy as it gets right now, and Indiana at the very top, which still does not feel real. I feel like this is a dream. You got to pinch me at some point. Wake me up.
Yeah, and it just gets interesting, too, because I said coming into like the last half of the week before Nebraska game, I said, look, I think they should be favored in every single game that's not Ohio State. But it's just to be that solid in each and every game. It's just the probability goes down each time just to be the and part of that. They're taking it one game at a time, and they are not struggling in any of these games.
Yeah, and it's kind of a cliche, right? The whole 1 week at a time, 1-0 thing. These guys live it.
Yeah.
Every time you talk to them, especially, Kurt Cignetti, obviously, we talked to him the most. But the players, they're all, I think it was, it might have been Justice Ellison yesterday, who said that, they don't pay attention to social media at all, which is great, because there are a lot of idiots on there. But for them, that's like the outside noise is like, they call it rat poison. It's like we can't pay attention to that. We just have to, prepare the way we know how to prepare and be ready for the next opponent. And they're like, we'll enjoy it for 24 hours or maybe not even for that long. This is the expectation for them. And, when they're celebrating a win in the locker room, they're singing the IU fight song. They look, there's a lot more passion. There's a lot more, everybody seems to click. It's not like 4 overtimes against Akron last year when they looked like they were being held at gunpoint. And it was a miracle that they escaped against one of the worst teams in the MAC. This is a team that just, it's just business for them. And Curt Cignetti preaches it all the time. He's like, okay, yeah, this is a big game because it's the next game. That's what he said about Nebraska. And he said, you saw him on the sideline at 42-7. He's still, grimacing and, coaching, and he's never letting up. And he's never satisfied. This is a guy who's been overlooked his entire career. He's been an underdog. He enjoys being an underdog. But for him to come out and continue just handling business the way he knows how, I think that's such a... It rubs off on the players, too. It's obvious.
Yeah, and... moving forward, that confidence, it just grows each week. That's the thing, too. It's just kind of like a snowball that keeps picking up as weeks go on. And other teams start to take notice. I mean, I don't know what Washington's thinking right now, seeing that Nebraska just lost to them by 49.
Yeah.
Like, if you're a player, I know you have all the confidence in the world, and you do think you're going to win that game. But in the back of your mind, it's like, okay, I hope we lose by 20 I hope we just lose by 20 instead of losing by 49.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just so like.
And again, the tough thing for Washington, too, I tweeted about this, and it got a lot of traction, and a lot of people had a lot of things to say. But the fact that the Big Ten is making Washington play at 9 a.m. Pacific time, noon Eastern, is a huge advantage for Indiana.
They're going to have to travel on. I think they're going to travel early.
They'll have to leave. I mean, they're coming off a bye week, which is an advantage. Yeah. But I know Curt Cignetti talks about how he wants Indiana to always, arrive as late as possible.
So funny, but yeah, that's another thing.
Yeah, he's like, we'll get in at like 8 o'clock on Friday, maybe have a meeting and go to bed, get up, play the game, and come home. I don't think Washington can do that because, you go out west, at least you gain a few hours of sleep, in theory. But if Washington waits, I mean, that's a lot to ask them to come out late. I think for them, honestly, they travel on Thursday, maybe even Wednesday night.
Oh, yeah, I was thinking that too.
To get acclimated to the Eastern time zone, which, again, for them is not normal. I thought it was the weirdest thing, being in Pasadena, having college football on at 9 a.m. Yeah. But for them, having to play that early, I think is another big advantage for the Hoosiers. And that's why you'd almost hope that, hypothetically, College Game Day shows up, because then Indiana would keep the noon kick and get more national attention. But it's a huge advantage for Indiana having Washington have to travel out east. And again, they left the Pac-12. They knew what they were getting into. But this is something we're seeing we're going to see that manifest in a way that will have a big impact on this game.
Yeah. How about, did you see what Rob Stone said yesterday on a social media post about Indiana soccer? About his favorite parts of Bloomington being Indiana soccer and Todd Yeagley and how appreciative he was of the Yeagley family.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh. I did not see that. Yeah.
How about the soccer team?
Indiana men's soccer. I will put my hand up and admit that a month ago, I said that Indiana men's soccer was in danger of missing the NCAA tournament just because it looked bleak for them. They couldn't score. They couldn't really win any big games. And then they upset Wisconsin. And then you start to think, okay, that's big. Let's, if you're Todd Yeagley, you got to keep it going at this point. They went up to Michigan on Tuesday, number 18 Michigan. They're ranked, and walloped them. It was 4-0 at halftime. Ended up being 5-0 the final. And then Friday night, homecoming weekend, you were on the call for that game. Mm-hmm. They beat Michigan State. What was it, 3-0?
Yeah, 3-1.
3-1.
It was Michigan State got a penalty. They both got penalty kicks on handballs. Really interesting game.
Wow.
Yeah.
You rarely ever, if ever, see that once, let alone twice in the same match.
Yeah. But no, their attack is so like Justin Weiss is like their third option.
And Weiss, of course, came over from Northwestern, highly touted player, all conference caliber. He's their third best?
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, well, they're one of two programs right now that has three different guys with 20 career goals.
Mahalik, Weiss,
and Sam Sarver.
And
the other, there's only one of two programs. The other one's West Virginia, who was
a powerhouse,
sitting at number one for the longest time.
Yeah.
Before, by the way, they got walloped by Dayton too.
Ooh, the
so
Flyers.
Dayton's just collecting wins left and right.
The pride of the A10.
Yeah.
Nice.
I mean, it's Yagtober. This happens every October with Yeagley, and we have to stop falling victim to it in September.
I think I took the rat poison.
I do it every year.
Yeah.
We've been here for 3 years. I've done it all 3 years.
Yeah. I'll admit I didn't follow Indiana men's soccer that closely in 2022, which was the year they lost to Syracuse on penalty kicks in the national championship. Heartbreaker. But I covered them last year. I mean, you've been calling some of their games this year. I've been following along. It is nothing short of, I wouldn't say it's magic. It's probably just business as usual. Like when the weather turns cold, Todd Yeagley's Indiana men's soccer teams just heat up.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. And I think the Big Ten this year, with realignment being what it is, they've moved the Big Ten soccer tournament so that it's entirely, I think, going to be held. Is it in Chicago? At SeatGeek Stadium?
So the first two rounds are at SeatGeek.
Okay.
But then for the championship, they go to the host site.
Okay. So I was wondering about that because that was a big, big reason why Indiana won that game last year over Penn State. I always thought it was so weird, though, because you're playing a conference championship, and it's a home game for one of the teams. Well, then again, that's what the Big Ten baseball tournament is for Nebraska every year, so I guess it's not that weird.
That's what the Big Ten basketball tournament will be for Indiana this year. I mean,
Purdue fans,
yeah,
I think there are a lot of Purdue fans in Indianapolis.
That's true.
Yeah, there are a lot of them.
That'll be fun.
Yeah,
we are getting way ahead of ourselves by talking about the Big Ten.
You've got to make the Big
tournament.
Ten tournament first. Indiana barely did that last year.
That's true. That's 15 teams this year in the Big Ten tournament.
Yeah.
So you got to make sure you're not that bottom 3.
That would be bad, generally speaking.
Yeah.
But I think the Big Ten, there are a lot of teams that on paper are worse than Indiana men's basketball. But there's a lot to be excited about with them, too. I mean, Hoosier Hysteria was on Friday, and it was, I think Miles Rice is going to be a star at Indiana. I really do. And, of course, Umar Ballo, the big fella, as Mike Woodson calls him. One of many big fellas in a long line of big fellas, a growing line of big fellas, perhaps, for Mike Woodson, who will play in the NBA. But man, Indiana men's basketball, a lot of buzz around them. It's interesting because very high expectations for Mike Woodson, obviously. Curt Cignetti had basically go 7-5, make a bowl game, we'll build you a statue. And he's blown that out of the water. If Indiana's good at football and men's basketball at the same time, this campus might become an unstoppable force.
Well, I said it on the broadcast on Saturday when I was calling the Indiana-Nebraska game. This is weird for Woodson. There's so little pressure on him now to start the season. He has less eyes, and which honestly might be a good thing for him. It just the vibe around it is different. You can tell just by the buzz and the way people are talking and hearing things around the street, hearing things around town. There's less Indiana basketball talk in late October than there is any year, and this is one of their most anticipated teams in a long time.
Yeah, and it used to be in Bloomington. It used to be in Indiana circles that, we just have to sleepwalk into October and get to basketball season, and then we don't have to care about football anymore until Indiana plays Purdue. That change is incredible, and I wonder if maybe having less of the pressure, less of the attention on the basketball team right now, at least from what it seems like in the pulse of Bloomington, I wonder if that's a good thing, because it's sort of like Indiana's got a lot of new guys, maybe not accustomed to the passion of the IU basketball fan base, kind of easing them into it. I know they play Tennessee in an exhibition in less than 10 days, but easing them into that, I think, is going to be big.
Yeah, I said it in one of the videos I made, like, when was the last time the vibes around all sports have been this big? I mean, women's basketball is going to be solid again. Men's soccer is doing a good job, or doing a solid job too, in the top 25. I mean, I'll say it again. We talked about this like 5 minutes ago, but it's Saturday, Sunday, Monday instead of Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and the women's for Bahamas
in the Battle for Atlantis.
Yeah, the Battle for Atlantis. That 8-day stretch from Saturday to Saturday, where you have Ohio State, then the 3 women's games in Bahamas, then the 3 men's games in Bahamas, then the Purdue game. I mean, that is awesome for Indiana fans. I mean, how can you not get excited about that week if you're an Indiana fan?
Yeah, it's going to be incredible. The vibes around IU sports are as high as they've ever been. I mean, Indiana football, men's and women's basketball, all ranked at the same time for the first time ever, which it's ridiculous. I mean, I'm sure there are some SEC schools that have pulled that off, but for Indiana to do it, historically, again, the worst football program in the history of Division I, to do what they're doing right now is fantastic. And it's only going to get better. So if you can buy a ticket, come out to see Indiana football. I mean, Michigan sold out. You only got 2 chances left. Washington and Purdue. Curtis Rourke will not start against Washington. It'll be Taven Jackson. Rourke out with an injury. But that's all the time we have for today. Indiana sports, again, the vibes immaculate in Bloomington. Colts and Dolphins coming up next. Matt Taylor and Rick Venturi will have the call. Thank you for listening to IU Sports Sunday. Have a fantastic rest of your Sunday morning and afternoon.
Now at Menards, save big money on everything for your next painting project. Give your space the platinum treatment with Platinum Plus interior paint. Its stain shield technology protects your spaces with a performance you